What's up, everybody? Welcome to the REINVESTORS October 2021 Meetup. We are absolutely excited to have our expert speaker here. It's just been a fun month, to be honest. I personally have had the pedal to the floor for the last 18 months, and I feel like as of a week ago, I've been able to take the pedal to the floor and raise it a degree, which isn't the right direction. But at least it kind of feels like, hey, I'm not going to die tomorrow. But really excited to cover these two topics. We got Kyle Green here tonight. Talk a little bit about interest rates, ask him a little bit about speculation on what kind of trend he's seeing. We're going to talk about some financing as well. We're going to share a little bit about what's been new with the REINVESTORS, and then we'll just do a massive Q&A between people for Kyle and ourselves and anybody else who wants to chime in, just to get the value you need out of a community like this, because this community is badass. We've got 1,500 people plus on Facebook. You know, we all have great connection sets. I saw a couple of people like Darren Voros online as well, who also has a massive audience and connection set. So if there's someone that you're looking for, or something that you need help with, this is the type of community to ask. And so for anybody who's still not on video, I encourage you to be on video. It gets us excited. I think everybody else gets more engaged. As a speaker, it's always great to see people's faces and make sure that you're engaging, because if you're sitting there going monotone, which I know Kyle's not, but sometimes maybe Randy is, I can snap the whip a little bit and make sure that everybody's excited. If you haven't joined our Facebook community yet, as I mentioned, we got over 1,500 people in, and we got people mainly on the West Coast here, because this is where our home base is, but we've got active investors and passive investors all across Canada, even down in the States as well. So if you've got unique questions, if you're just starting off, if you're well advanced into it, this is an awesome community to be a part of. Lots of communication and conversation taking place on a daily basis. This is where we post some deals and some valuable tips, some articles, stay in touch and in tune with what's going on throughout BC, throughout Canada, and just in real estate investing in general. We do this every single month for 5.5 years. It's been, we haven't missed a month other than like specifically taking some time off here and there through the summer. But every single month we connect on the third Tuesday of each month at 6 p.m. PST, 9 p.m. EST. So if you find value, which I'm sure you do, because you keep coming back, put it in your calendar, tell your friends, tell your family, walk into work on Wednesday morning, be like, yo, everybody, guess what I just learned? And then share about the REINVESTORS community, get them encouraged to join next month, because next month is going to be badass as well. Who are we? We, as the REINVESTORS, we're active investors ourselves. The Meetup, we do 2-day workshops. We've got a mastermind. We've done big events. We're educators. We love educating people on the knowledge that we learn from people like Kyle and the rest of our mentors, and just sharing that with people that is around us. And we're active developers as well over the last couple of months. This part is obviously super important to us. Randy, take it from here, my friend.
Yeah, one of our favorite things, we're on a mission to financially educate 1 million people and inspire them to invest in real estate so they can start living a more fulfilled life. And the reason why we're doing that is because today I read a stat that said something like 76% of all Canadians between the age 50 and 75 do not feel that they're comfortable enough to retire with the funds they have. And their recommendations, no joke, at the bottom of the article said, maybe you should not take your CPP until you're 70 years old so that you can have more to live off of. What kind of society are we living in that's the best advice that we can give people? That's why we're here. All of us on this call are here to step up to learn how we can get financially educated so that we can start inspiring people around us, so that we can start changing this economy and helping people retire. That's our absolute dream and mission here. The second biggest part of that is once you learn how to make that money, you can actually go make a difference with it, which is our biggest passion. It's why we thrive. That's why we do what we do. That's why we show up every single month, is because if we go bigger, then we can give bigger. And that's our mission statement here, inspiring others to go bigger with their dreams and goals so they can give bigger with their profits. And we support Kids Sport Victoria. As anybody who's been a part of this for probably over 4.5 to 5 years now, we've written checks for Kids Sport every single year for all the golf tournaments, and we passionately encourage anybody that's looking for an organization to support. We know them inside and out, top to bottom. We know their whole organization. The money you put in goes where it needs to go, and they run on minimal staff and share salaries and everything they can to bring their overhead down. Incredible organization.
And yes, I do have more than 2 shirts as shown in these, in these 2 pictures. But for anybody who's new here, Randy, why is Kid Sport passionate for us?
And we love Kid Sport because growing up, Steve and I played a lot of sports, and we found that's where we gained a lot of our leadership. That's where we gained a lot of our team skills. That's how we learned how to work together in where we are. So our belief is that if we can put more kids into sport, then they'll be able to have a better life, because that's where Steve and I learned a lot of our life skills from, was playing organized sports.
Absolutely.
Steve went over basically what we've accomplished, but we've been doing this for quite a while at our meetups. We've ran a bunch of other things that we do. We've ran some workshops, different types of opportunities for education. And I think we've transacted over 20 million now and raised just over 50 million. We've done a lot of stuff. It's been a lot of fun. And we basically touched on every different component of real estate investing, from single family through Airbnb, through development, through some small multifamily. So pretty diverse inside the real estate space.
And Randy's being a little bit modest. If you have questions on anything real estate investing, bring them over to us. If we don't know, we're going to know the right person who has that answer and can connect you that way.
And one of the things we want to do is just give you guys a few quick updates. A lot of you have been asking, getting some messages saying, how's this development? What's going on here, where we're at? So we thought we'd just quickly take 3 minutes and just run through the gauntlet of what we've been up to over the past probably 18 months or so. A lot of you were here in the beginning when we raised money for our first big development project, which was Somerset Developments. It's over on Salt Spring Island. It's 12 homes that we're building. So we bought the land, development permit ready. We've gone through the building permit process through the Islands Trust. If you don't know what the Islands Trust is, basically, if you want to apply for a building permit in Victoria, you have to go through the CRD and apply for a building permit. If you go on one of the Gulf Islands, what they do is they make you go through the Islands Trust. And what that is just another layer of bureaucracy where they get to dictate and choose how you work inside that island. Then from there, you have to go into the CRD and apply for your building permit. So we've had a little bit of challenges inside there, as every single person that's ever worked on any of these islands will tell you. But we're doing great. So we've sold 3 of the 12 units already, which is amazing, considering we've barely even broke ground. And we are just about to start pouring some concrete and doing our vertical building here within probably the next, I was talking to our contractor today, and they said by middle of November, we'll be putting some wood in the ground to start building, which is fantastic. So hopefully by next month's meetup, we'll have a picture of something to show you guys, more than just rock.
I feel like when it comes to the Islands Trust, if we said that we weren't having any challenges, people would know that we're lying, because everybody I talk to has always said the Islands Trust is a bit of a headache to work with. If there's anybody on the Islands Trust right now on this call, you know it's true. Synergy Mastermind, dude, tell us a little bit about this.
Yeah, Synergy's been a fun project for us as well. Many know we started that last year. It's something that Steve and I wanted to create where we could just have some higher level conversations about some of the bigger projects we're doing. So we stuck about 40 of us together into a community, and we just support and help each other. We travel around Canada doing different events and just getting on calls and supporting each other. That's one of our biggest passion projects. We love it a lot. So it's been a lot of fun for us, and has been something we put a lot of time, effort, and energy into, is creating just a group of like-minded people that can support each other, that are full-time real estate investors that are playing pretty big games. And I was just talking to a group today that just bought another 44 units in Saskatchewan. And then I talked to another group today that was just buying another 24 unit out in the East Coast, and a few other groups. So those are the kind of people that are inside there, but it's just been a lot of fun being able to put that group together.
And I'll add one more thing onto this. This guy here in the middle, if you don't know him, his name is Darren Voros. He's got probably one of the best, if not the best, real estate YouTube channel in Canada right now. And that's not just because he's our partner. It's legit. It's awesome. But one of the coolest things is, like, we actually met through communities like this. And Randy saw him, I think you saw him speak like on their first Level Up group or something like that. And I was like, hey, that guy's kind of rad. We reached out to him. We ended up connecting. We hung out for a couple hours on some exploratory type of meetings. And then we built this mastermind together. He's in Toronto. We're here in Victoria, BC. So basically coast to coast. Didn't meet each other for a year after being business partners for an entire year. Met each other last month for the first time. And it's just really cool to like show a little bit of validation that networks like this do have a massive impact when you put yourself and your energy out there. You can create partnerships, you can network with people, you can build empires. And this is just one small example of, you know, the dozens of different partnerships that have come from Synergy or from the Reinvestors community or from the Level Up community. We also have this other project, which is in View Royal here in Victoria. It's called Skyview. It's been ongoing for about the last year. We're done blasting. We're setting the anchors right now. We're getting ready to pour concrete. We're about 60% sold on it already. And this is a current, like this is 2 weeks ago, I think, that I took this photo. So the huge shout out to Darren and Austin, who are our realtors pre-selling this site. You know, you can't see anything. It's just we're selling a vision right now, and they're doing an awesome job with pre-sales. Really excited about how the team's come together for this first big condo project. And then we have two other ones that are in the regulatory phases right now. We have the Sterling, which you might have seen, which is a 56 unit in Esquimalt, 1 block off of the water. We just took possession of the second of the 2 lots the beginning of this month of October. And excited to get that one through the Esquimalt regulatory process. This beautiful building right here is called the Farrell. It's over by UVic, if you know the area of Victoria. It's a 24 unit in Saanich. It's already DP approved, and excited to put the shovel in the dirt in that one over the next couple of months. Really excited about this one because I think it's going to be a bit of a quick turnaround as there's no underground parking. But you know, rewinding back to Salt Spring through Skyview and into these 2 projects, you know, it's just been a really great learning experience for Randy and I, Jay included, of course, as well. Just partnering up with the TLA team and pushing forward on learning something that we're all really passionate about and have the ability to have a massive impact with people. Randy mentioned one of our mission statements that we want to financially educate 1 million people and inspire them to invest in real estate so they can live for life. No, I can't say that any faster. But on the Sterling side of things, we actually went through an Addy platform, which is a crowdfunding source. And there's 946 people that came through that platform, plus the investors that we work with. So there's almost 1,000 people that we get to work with and support in a solid investment choice with just this one building alone. Super exciting for us to be able to have that type of impact. And then we have one more project that we'll wrap up the year with.
Can you go back 1 sec? Of
course.
Steve?
Yeah, man.
Go back 1 sec. So,
whoa.
Wrong way there. Just if anyone is interested, tonight we are hosting a virtual open house for the proposed rezoning of Sterling. It's tonight. It's literally right after this call. It's at 7:30. I'm happy to put a web link in for everybody. And basically that's our development team going through the process, doing a virtual open house just to hear positive and negative reinforcement for the building. If you guys support the reinvestors and you support what we do, knowing that we come from good intentions and good hearts for the developments that we do, we would love to have you there in support of our projects. Or if you had some ideas or suggestions on how we can make it better, we're always open to that as well. But that is tonight, going through a virtual open house for the proposed rezoning of our Sterling project. Cool opportunity for you to hop in and just learn a little bit and see what's happening. I will put the link in the chat right now that you can copy and paste into your web browser, and it starts at 7:30.
Yeah, awesome, dude. I forgot about that. If you could throw that link in there right now, that'd be awesome. And then just a quick little tip for any aspiring developer. One of the biggest pieces that we've learned from the TLA crew is how they push through regulatory so quickly. And a big monumental piece of that is actually having basically a pre-app package already built out before they even get to the application process. So they have existing relationships with city council, with the mayor, with administration and staff, and they get a lot of that feedback up front on what can be done before we even go to DP and BP. And so one of those pieces is community outreach, is talking to the neighbors, getting community feedback on design and impact and all that kind of stuff. And that's what you'll see a little bit on this the Zoom meeting that Randy will share here. And then this guy here, as I said, is Farrell's already DP approved. We're going through BP here shortly. And then Highlands is the upcoming one that we have right now. Super cool. Some of the technology that we get to use. This is an actual real street view. Like every little bump that you see is real in the road. This is the design of the building. There's multifamily all around it. Super excited to start this one in about a month and change. But just wanted to give a little bit of an update on, well, me specifically in a sense, because I've been so quiet over the last 6 months. This is a lot of stuff that I've been working on, and just wanted to share some of that update to some of the investors here on the call. Hey, what's up? And hopefully show you and inspire you that you can jump into some big projects, and that partnerships are awesome through communities like this. Now, Kyle, this is a cue for you to get ready. This is just, I've talked to a few people recently where they just don't know what to expect with interest rates right now. And they're either talking about buying an income property or a primary residence or a development site. And I've just seen a lot of kind of confusion of, I don't know what to expect. And then when you start, connecting with different brokers or different banks, and you're getting different products of mortgages fed to you from every different direction, you start over analyzing it if you're a data freak like me, and then you get paralyzed and you're like, you know what? Nope, not gonna do it anymore. Or you just throw a dart up in the air and be like, yeah, I want this one. Well, if you're facing any of those types of pains, have no fear. Mr. Kyle Green is here.
Wow.
And yes, I do need to work on my Photoshop.
Yeah, it's pretty weak, but I'm very impressed. That's a very good photo.
I should have probably used you like flat on the ice with your hockey gear on, being like, but I couldn't find that picture.
There's the one that's been floating around occasionally, and me and my Speedo, and this one does, so this will do.
yeah, this could be your new.
I'm glad the Speedo one is like of the past. There's a couple of people here that have probably seen it, but I'm glad that it's not getting reused. There was a time where on the speaker circuit, like every speaker, well, not every speaker, but every event, somebody would bring it up and use it again. So I'm glad that time period of my life is over.
A high five to anybody who's watching this right now who can send a link in the chat to that Speedo link.
There's also like the pre-keto Kyle Speedo photo, and then there's the post-keto Kyle Speedo. So yeah, there's two different versions of it, but
right on. We'll have to track that down, and legit, I will give somebody a high five if you guys can find that and share it with us, because we'll have to use that in future presentations. But if you haven't met this awesome guy before, I consider him an investor masquerading as a top broker here in Canada. One of the greatest things that we've learned about working with Kyle is that he knows the game, and a lot of people don't. A lot of brokers in Canada, especially here in the Victoria area, they're just a part of the process. You walk in there, you give them your application, they give you the best possible package without actually understanding your circumstances, and they ship you a product to move you on to the next one. Kyle's a little bit different. He gets to work with you in a little bit more specific type of way. He and his awesome team, they're based out of Vancouver. They've helped thousands of different people. Kyle's spoken on stage all across Canada as a trusted dude. So whether it's us or Keyspire or Reeg or whoever reaches out, he's always very keen to speak and to educate. And he knows it from experience as well. He's actually a past sponsor of the REINVESTORS. We had to stop sponsorships when we went to the virtual aspect on things, because it's a little bit different when it's live and you're buying cookies and all that kind of fun stuff live in person versus this. I wish I could send everybody a cookie. I don't know where you live, sorry. But he's also a top-rated author, 2 books actually, I think, right?
Yeah, 2 books.
2 books, both great pieces if you're starting off in real estate. And without any kind of further ado, Kyle, why don't you take us out, and I'll stop my screen and you can jump straight into your presentation.
Awesome. Good stuff. So I'd like to talk a little bit about interest rates first. And I actually have pulled up a bond chart, because this is actually how lenders determine what's going to happen with interest rates. So who here, put out a show of hands, who here knows how fixed rates are determined? A couple hands. I just gave you guys a really big hint, by the way, because I have the Canada 5-year bond yields up on the chart. Yeah, so a little bit of a hint here. I'm actually going to zoom in on this a little bit, because I'd like to show you how this works. So what actually happens is, Jesus, lots of ads and stuff. What happens is the banks will lend out money, and then they're going to bundle up the mortgages together, and then they actually securitize them and actually sell the assets behind the scenes. And so that's called a securitization. And these bundles are called mortgage-backed securities. This is actually what caused the US subprime crisis. So back in 2006, 2007, 2008, banks were getting together, bundling up a bunch of junk rated mortgages, sprinkling in a couple of A-rated mortgages. Then they go to the rating agency. Rating agency has said, yeah, there's a couple A-rated mortgages in here. Stamp, this is a AAA product. And then they turn around and sell this AAA product. Now, the international demand was so high for these because, like, wow, these are real estate backed, and this is the yield on them. We want more of this. So then, information from the top end investors would trickle down to the banks, and the banks would be told, "Hey, we need you to push more money out the door." So guess what? The frontline workers are being told, "Hey, you know those people that you declined last week? Maybe call them back and let them know that you've got this brand new mortgage that you can approve them for, a balloon mortgage or something like that, where the client only pays a small interest rate for a period of 3 years or 5 years, and then on the renewal, they'll just pay a big balloon lump sum payment." So long story short, banks in the US were actually pushing out money and being told if their default rates were not at least 4%, then they weren't lending out enough money. To put things in perspective, in Canada during the subprime crisis in 2008, our default ratio was about 0.33 to 0.4%, 1/10 during the subprime crisis. And before the subprime crime crisis, actually, that's a good one, the subprime crisis. Before the subprime crisis, it was 4% in the US. So it's kind of an interesting stat. So long story short, this whole thing and House of Cards kind of fell apart, but the fundamental remains that when lenders lend out money and then bundle up these mortgages, international investors can either buy bond yields or they can buy mortgage-backed securities. They're both a very similar asset, very low risk because they're attached to a very good security. You know, there's Canadian bond yields, which are backed by the Canadian government or other, you know, there's obviously other governments out there as well. There's bonds that can be attached to like municipal bonds. So cities can have bonds. Big companies can issue bonds. There's a lot of different large entities that can issue bonds, but in general, bonds are very safe assets. So in general, what happens is the fixed rate mortgage pricing is very correlated with bond yields. So what I have up here is my crystal ball. People ask me, what's happening with interest rates? I'm like, hold on, let me pull out my crystal ball. Investing.com/rates -bonds, and then Canada 5-year bond yield is literally my crystal ball. And I look here and I see what's happening with the bond chart. So this bond chart is really easy to look at. What I'm actually pulling up here is you can see where bonds were pre-COVID levels. You can see obviously where COVID hit. We're looking at like early February, and all of a sudden rates started to fall off the cliff. And then all of a sudden here, this little increase back in the spring, back in February, was when we saw a huge bond sell-off. Oops, I clicked the button and now all of a sudden something's changing. There's a huge bond sell-off back in February, and that's where bond yields shot up. And then there was another increase fairly recently, and this increase, it's hard to know exactly what this increase is, but some of it might be because I'm hearing and this is very complicated stuff that I'm hearing, but it sounds like some major banks in the US are starting to move into more cash. And so there's less money entering markets right now. And that's meaning that in order to attract money, bond yields are starting to go up. There's some concern about the Evergrande situation in China. And so some of the big banks are starting to accumulate cash just in case this goes sideways. So there's some inflation measures that might be pushing rates up. And there's also a short-term potential blip here where a lot of people might be hoarding cash. Anytime you see a potential for volatility, often you see interest rates actually start to go up a little bit before they immediately come back down. And you actually see at certain points here, like as COVID started to become more of a factor in February, all of a sudden there's actually a small little bump up over in February of 2020. And we're starting to see perhaps the same thing with banks preparing for Evergrande. Long story short, I'm actually finding it very difficult to predict the interest rates for the next 6 months because we have two very large opposing forces pulling on each other. In general, when you look forward, you generally predict interest rates will rise because in general, people are optimistic by nature and they say, hey, you know what? It's likely that things are going to slowly improve over time. And so in general, if that happens, then usually people don't want to invest in bonds. If things are going to get better, you probably want to be in equities, stocks, you want to be in other assets that have higher rates of return. And so if money is leaving the bond market and going into stocks, then the yields have to go up in bond markets to attract money still. And so in general, when times are good, bond yields go up and fixed rates go up. However, when times are bad, usually that's where money flocks to safety. Bonds are considered very, very safe. And so if you're a country or company raising money and you have a line about the door, you can lower your yields and you'll still raise the money that you need. So the issue here is we have two opposing forces. We have inflation and the expectation that things are going to improve moving forward. Those will typically push interest rates up. On the flip side, we have a looming concern of what's going to happen with the Evergrande situation. And in general, unforeseen negative circumstances arise that people can't predict. 9/11, COVID, subprime crisis, Brexit to a lesser extent, things like that often have a inverse effect and push interest rates down, but it's hard to predict those. And so that's the challenge with predicting interest rates. Expect that at some point there's going to be some kind of negative news that comes out, and then that will push interest rates back down. And it could be Evergrande, it could be something else. So it makes it difficult to predict interest rates moving forward. But long story short, what you're seeing here is bond yields go up. That means that fixed rates are going up, which is the trend right now. We saw banks a little earlier on, even about 4 to 5 weeks ago, we're just lowering interest rates down a smidge right around this part of the graph. That's where they started to lower the rates. And then all of a sudden, like a few days later, oh, never mind, we're starting to go back up. And we've been slowly marching up this hill for a little while. Now, that being said, to give you an idea of where interest rates are, owner occupied for variable, you're looking at about 1.5% or better. In fact, if you're putting less than 20% down, you can get interest rates that are even much better than 1.5% for a variable. If you're looking at a 5-year fixed, however, you're looking at about 2% for insured for your own residence, or closer to about 2.5% as of probably tomorrow with many lenders for your own residence. You can generally add a little bit onto that for rental properties. So you're looking at probably 1.6 to 2% for a variable for a rental, and probably around 2.5 to 2.75 actually for 5-year fixed on a rental property. So just something to keep in mind.
Can I ask you a quick question here?
Yeah.
You mentioned it about a minute ago, and it's one of my favorite words of the last year, and that word is inflation. I would love to hear your personal thoughts on where we stand as a nation, and also your professional thoughts on how interest rates relate specifically with projected inflation.
Yeah, so in general, the Bank of Canada sees inflation at 2% being their target. So banks like predictable, constant inflation. It's good because it shows economic growth, and they usually have a target of 2%. Now that's what's called the core inflation, and it doesn't in fact incorporate much of the core expenses of you and I, which is it's crazy, but they don't include a lot of very important things, including oil and housing, et cetera, into that expense. And so it doesn't really make a lot of sense that they call it core when really it's quite the opposite. But long story short, they have a formula that they look at regarding inflation, and they like that to be around 2%. Right now, we're overtrending that, and there's a bit of a tug of war on, well, is that just the fact that we had deflation because nobody's buying anything for a while, and all of a sudden it's gone the complete opposite direction? Is the inflation because of supply chain issues? Like, for instance, and a good example is, I probably would have, and there's a lot of people out there that would be in the same boat. If I'm trying to get something because I'm trying to do a renovation or whatever, I would pay more to get it tomorrow, if I can speed up that process. And a lot of you here would probably do the same thing. Debbie would pay a lot of money to have her dang windows tomorrow, right? So there's a lot of people factor. Yeah, exactly. So the supply chain is affecting it. The question, of course, is, well, when the supply chain starts to correct, is that going to bring down the inflation back to a normal level or not? And so I think that's the problem, is it's hard to understand how much of the inflation is supply chain driven and how much of it is just regular inflation driven. But inflation does have an impact with mortgage rates, because by lowering interest rates, it causes people to be more likely to borrow money to grow. And that's true from a high level business perspective, growth wise, and also from a consumer perspective too. So if you can borrow money to buy a car and the financing rate is cheaper, then you're more likely to buy a new car. As a business, if you can borrow more money to invest, then you're more likely to do so. We are more likely as real estate investors to borrow money to buy real estate, even though the values have gone up. Interest rates are so low that it almost counterbalances and your payments are about the same, right? So it causes people to justify making expenses that they wouldn't have otherwise made. However, if inflation starts to run away, the bank is very concerned about that. And in the past, we have seen situations where inflation starts to become very, very nasty and very scary. And in those types of situations, the government is very concerned with that. And raising interest rates is a way to combat inflation, because they can slow down people justifying borrowing money to go buy goods and causing inflation to continue to run away.
Thank you, man. I just wanted to mention that real quick because I think it's a really important topic that gets underlooked at or underappreciated. I'm a believer that we're in a very early standpoint of a high inflationary period. And so basically what inflation is you get more cash out there in the market. So what happens is your actual dollar impact goes down, but the dollar you have in your jeans goes up. And so if the dollars you have in your jeans goes up, what can you do? You can afford a higher property value. So instead of buying an $800,000 property, you can buy a $900,000 property. So what's going to happen at that point? There's going to be a whole bunch of buyers out there that are competing over that $800,000 place because they can now afford a $900,000 place. So what are they going to do? They're going to put in an $810 offer, an $820 offer, an $850 offer, an $875 offer, a $900,000 offer, which is going to inflate the market. And my point out of this, not necessarily inflate, but it's going to rise the market, possibly inflate. But my point out of it is that in these inflationary type of periods, it's historically shown that hard assets like real estate go up in value. So being in an early stage, what I think is an early stage, maybe 6 months to a year, let's say, of an inflationary type of period, we can kind of project or guess or speculate that because we're in the early stage of it, that house prices are going to continue to rise because of the asset class that it is.
Yeah, 100%. Because a car will always be worth a car, right? But a dollar is not worth a dollar tomorrow if there's more money flooding the system day in, day out. Your dollar today will only buy you 99 cents worth of stuff tomorrow in a high inflation market. So that means that what happens is in high inflationary times, especially when you have hyperinflation, it runs away, and it's actually it's exponential, because if I know my money will be worth less tomorrow, then I'm more likely to just spend it on anything I can, any hard asset I can today. But then it accelerates it, because now if everybody's rushing out to get rid of their cash as quickly as they can, then it starts to spiral out of control. So it's a very interesting time, because when COVID first hit and there's a lot of money getting pumped in the system, I know a lot of people were saying, thank you, and this is going into the bank because I have no clue what's going on. And then probably 2 months into it, I would say May or June, people started saying, you know what? I still have my job. A lot of people figured out, especially white collar individuals, were busier than they've ever been all of a sudden, realized, hey, wait a second, I still have a job. And all of a sudden that money started to flood back into the marketplace, right? And that's where the inflation really started to take off. And so, in an inflationary time period, you want to be in hard assets. There's been times of hyperinflation, like the Central America has had situations like this. Venezuela is going through this right now. And in situations like that, they will buy any type of hard asset they can. Like cars, we talk about cars in North America as being a bad investment because, you never want to borrow money to buy a depreciating asset. Well, guess what? In hyperinflation, cars are great because cars get you from A to B, and a car is always worth a car. And so you'll see in hyperinflationary periods of time, history will show that people will just accumulate as many cars as they can because they're easy and quick to accumulate those assets, right? So kind of
such a crazy cool topic. I love it. It's such a weird, bouncy type of world, but I didn't mean to hijack the call. Please continue.
No, that was interesting. I think that was probably much more interesting than what I usually have to talk about. So, so that's what that's predicting interest rates and where things are at right now, where things are looking to head. But it is tricky, and I've been saying this to a couple of people lately. just in the last couple of weeks, I'm having a bit more of a challenge predicting where interest rates are heading, because I'm hearing all of a sudden the Bank of Canada saying, oh, we might be raising interest rates sooner than we expect, as of like even as early as April next year. But on the flip side, I'm also seeing, well, if Evergrande or other things that are looming here become a major problem, then that could push interest rates down as opposed to up. So it's kind of weird to have two large, strong opposing forces, both making a bit of a stance, and it'll be whichever force is stronger that ultimately wins in this case. So it'll be interesting to see, but I'm definitely struggling a little bit. I felt like it was a bit clear earlier on predicting and making a prediction based off of the information, but now we have information that's varying quite a bit and two very different perspectives on what's going to happen moving forward. So it's tough right now. Long story short, based off of that, there is going to be a wider spread for the next little bit, variable versus fixed. And so the question is, do you take variable or do you take fixed? Very soon here, we're going to see probably closer to a 0.75 to 1% gap between a variable rate and a fixed rate. So then you have to start doing the math on, well, how much do variable rates have to increase for you to pay more in interest going variable versus fixed? One often forgotten aspect of this, however, is the flexibility of the variable, because if you sell your property, your penalty is capped at 3 months interest if you're in a variable rate mortgage. The penalties for fixed rate mortgages are very steep, and they're expected, based off of the current pricing, to be 5 to 10 times more expensive to break a 5-year fixed rate mortgage with a major bank than if you were in a variable rate mortgage. On top of that, you can convert a variable rate into a fixed rate and lock it into whatever the fixed rates are at that time. So we generally like the variable because of the flexibility of it. That being said, just with recent information that just has literally come out in the last couple of weeks, it's a little bit harder to say with a high degree of certainty how long we think that the variable rate will stay flat for. Now, all of a sudden, if it does start to go up in April, well, how quickly will it go up, and will it match where we are at right now for fixed rates within like 1 year? Well, it's going to look a lot worse. If you could have taken a fixed rate in the low 2s and had that set for 5 years, sure, maybe your penalty would be a bit higher, but if variable rates start to normalize very quickly, then you might end up paying more in interest. So it'd be interesting to see, but my take on it, and I've been doing this for this November 1st will be 15 years I've been doing this. My experience has shown that variable almost always outperform fixed. And yes, of course, if you look at the long-term trend, interest rates have in general have been decreasing. But there's going to be some negative news that will come up at some point in the next little while. I will almost bet money on it. I don't know what it's going to be, but something negative will come up and interest rates will get pushed back down again, and you'll be in the more flexible product and you'll be able to take advantage of that dip again. So my take is, in general, probably still stick with variable, especially when the discounts off of prime are really good. I'll ask if there's any quick questions on rates. I'll talk about that now, and then I'll go into construction financing, because I did a webinar not too long ago that I think you were attending. Was it you, Steve, that attended? Yeah. So I know that I had a lot of people actually come out for that. It surprised me a bit, but I think a lot of people are considering building a home. And so Steve said, hey, you know what, Kyle, maybe that would be a good topic to talk about. So maybe I'll open up really quickly for questions about rates, and then I can start to go into construction financing. I've got a presentation for that.
Yeah, I saw Debbie just made a comment that TD called her to let her know that they're raising rates in a few days. So it's awesome when you get people like that, having that relationship, that they'll reach out and give you a little poke.
It's very common that happens. It's interesting because the banks generally have better margins on fixed rates than they do on variable rates. And so a lot of time when rates go up, see, another person was called. So if the bank, here's the question I have. The bank represents their stockholders, right? And so their stockholders are investing in the bank to make money. Do you think the bank is calling you because they actually think that you would save more money by being in the fixed rate mortgage? Or do they call you because now that you're hearing rates might go up, and like perfect time to call their client base and get them to transition from variable into fixed? And this happens a lot. But it's historically the margins are thicker on fixed rate mortgages than they are on variable rate mortgages. And so I'm always a little concerned with this. Now, not to say that now is not the right time to lock it in. I think history will tell. And frankly, if I had a crystal ball better than this website, and I knew exactly what's going to happen with interest rates, I'd probably be on a beach somewhere sipping a margarita. I wouldn't be here right now, you know, in Vancouver, slogging it out, putting 12-hour days in, doing mortgages.
You'd
So
still be
nobody
presenting
really
here,
knows.
just
Yeah.
on a beach instead.
Exactly. I'd still be talking about mortgages, but I'd be sitting on a beach, you know. But I do think that it's important to note that the bank's margins are thicker, and they always have been, on fixed rate mortgages than they are on variable rate mortgages. And so this almost always happens when rates are going up. And I've heard it before where a bank will call a client and say, oh, rates are going up tomorrow. And I'm like, you know what? My rep from the same bank emailed me today saying the rates are going down tomorrow. So actually hold off if you want to lock it in. They call back the same person later. Oh, great timing. Our rates went down. It's like, you told me yesterday they're going up. What's going on? But no, they are going up. So if you're thinking that you really wanted a fixed rate, then now might be a good time to consider locking it in, because they might be on that slow upward trajectory. Kale has a quick question. So when leveraging currently owned real estate, is there any benefit to using a HELOC to purchase other property instead of refinancing the current property? I hear most investors prefer a HELOC, so you can only take the money when you need it, but is there any benefit to choosing the refinance option? So not really, Kale. The HELOC is great because most banks allow you to have the HELOC, so you don't pay interest on the line of credit unless you use it. But then when you do cut the check and you use it to invest, most banks will allow you to have a certain number of mortgage portions under the umbrella. So normally the downside to the line of credit is that the money borrowed on the line of credit is prime plus about 0.5 in most cases, so 2.95. Whereas a mortgage, you might be getting prime minus, 1%, so 1.5%. So the rate is literally double right now for a line of credit than it is on a mortgage. That being said, though, what you can do with most banks is you can have a line of credit with available credit. You're not paying interest until you use it, and then you write a check using the line of credit, and then you lock in that line of credit into a mortgage term, and then you get a mortgage rate on it. So I still recommend in general using the line of credit to fund your investments. And yeah, Tara, to answer your question, the readvanceable mortgages usually have higher interest rates, and so on the line of credit, the line of credit rate is a bit higher. A readvanceable mortgage doesn't always have a higher rate. It's just that you're dealing with a smaller number of lenders all of a sudden, so we can't shop non-bank lenders and as many credit unions who don't have the same product. We're limiting ourselves primarily to just banks for the readvanceable programs, which then may mean that you're limiting your options, and you might be having to take a higher rate. So it doesn't mean that the rate is absolutely higher, but it does mean that you have less options to pick from, which may result in you paying a higher rate. Cool. I'll go through my presentation now. So let me just open that up.
Just a point of random curiosity. We within the REINVESTORS network, there's a ton of people who are income property owners or seeking to have an income property. You deal with thousands of different people across the country. If you're an investor, whether starting or have a couple properties under your portfolio, is there a clear winner in terms of fixed versus variable in terms of like popularity? Like, do people typically just want the consistent known expense for their cash flow property, or on the opposite side of the coin, are people more so just interested in like what's going to give me the best bang for the buck?
I'll find that my investor clients are very heavily skewed towards variable. In this climate, I think overall 90% of our clients are going variable, and of that, our investor clients, probably 95 or 98% are going variable. It's not always that skewed, but in general, investors are more likely to go variable, and then first-time home buyers are a little bit more on the fence, and then regular homeowners are kind of 50-50. Like sometimes a first-time home buyer might be a bit more skewed to taking fixed. Here's the big reason, and this is the big reason we tell clients to consider it if you're an investor. You probably have a bigger stomach for handling the risk, right? You're buying an investment property, right? It's not a small amount of risk that you're taking on. So you're probably more open to taking that risk. But the most important thing is leverage is like the number one thing in investing in real estate, right? So let's say the property value goes up 100 grand and 2 years later, you want to go refinance it. And the current bank that you got set up with is like, oh, sorry, we can't qualify you, or rules changed. And you're like, oh, crap. Well, I took a 5-year fixed rate mortgage and now my penalty is 25 grand to leave the bank. So there goes like a third of the amount of equity I'm going to be able to pull out if I do it with that bank. If you had taken a variable rate, maybe your penalty would be $3,000 to leave that bank and go refinance and pull out all that cash and then use that to reinvest somewhere else. And so the flexibility of being able to bounce around a little bit, because lender policies change all the time in this industry, and your financial situation will change too, more drastically than your typical client. So we find that having the flexibility to be able to jump around to access the most capital possible outweighs the potential risk on the interest rate in most cases.
Awesome. Thanks, man. Thanks for that debrief on interest rates. Let's jump into the financing aspect on things. And up to that presentation, we know we got 70 plus people from all across Canada that are chomping at the bit to understand it.
How long do I have, by the way, Steve? How long do you go for?
Yeah, if you can rip through it in like 30 minutes, it'd be awesome to leave us some time to do some Q&A.
Sounds good. Yeah, that gives me a good idea of how long I have for it. I'll talk a lot about interest rates and a couple of history lessons. So couldn't help myself. And you didn't help either. So
good old inflation, right? I can't.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Let me ask you about inflation. Okay, cool. So let's go into construction financing. All right. So I'm going to talk about how construction financing works. I've got a number of different things I want to talk about. I'm going to talk about the dream versus reality, what the major challenges with doing construction financing, how it works.
Just a heads up, I still see the investing.com page. I don't know if you're.
Oh, you know what? Yeah, ones. I see. Hold on. It's on the wrong side here.
I'm a visual learner, dude. You can't just talk to me like this.
Yeah. Here, I'm going to open up the table of contents. It's still opening up on the other screen. You know what I'm going to do here? I'll just stop the share and then I'll do the share on the other screen. There we go. Is that now working for you guys?
That works. You got to love it when technology actually works.
Yeah, exactly. Got so many Zooms now, you figure out how to quickly, quickly assess this. 2 years ago, like, oh no, I don't know what I'm doing. So I'll talk about the dream versus the reality, the major challenge in doing construction financing, how it works, what the draw schedule is. I'll go through some examples. I'll go through some pros and cons of doing construction financing. I'll talk about residential, commercial, and private, because those are 3 different financing channels you can go through to do construction. I'll talk about getting creative and some tips and tricks. So building your dream house, everybody wants to do that. And, you look at like, what's the finished product? Oh man, it'd be great. I'm going to pick my dream home. We're going to, customize everything and it's going to be great. And then the reality of like, holy cow, this is a lot of decisions to make. And I've seen a lot of families go through a lot of stress, actually realizing that like, oh my gosh, I wish we just had somebody build it for us, because designing and picking what what crown molding will we have, and what kind of cabinets and what colors and this and that, and then the husband and wife are arguing about, no, I want this color, I want that color. It's actually a lot of work. But there's another major issue with doing construction, and it's actually the cash. This is probably the major issue, and understanding how construction financing works and how the draw schedules will work will shed some light on this. But the reality is, we get a lot of clients that inquire about construction financing, and probably 3 out of 5 people that ask us about construction financing do not have enough cash to be able to do it. So a lot of people just don't have enough cash to fulfill the requirements of doing a construction mortgage. So that can be a bit of a challenge. So let me explain how construction financing works. It's called a cost to complete basis. And so what the lenders are always doing is they're always holding back enough money to finish the entire project. And I'll actually have a wicked spreadsheet. Don't you guys worry. I brought a spreadsheet with me. But the spreadsheets that actually are, yeah, Steve, yay, spreadsheets. Huh? Exactly. So I'll show you guys and articulate this on a spreadsheet to show you guys how exactly these break down. And the funds are always released in draws. And so one key component, and this is what I always tell clients, is the banks aren't going to give you money up front and then cross their fingers and hope you don't go to Vegas with it. They're going to reimburse you for work and value that's already in the property. So say, great, you've met this stage. Now here's some cash to get to the next stage, and then here's some cash to get to the next stage. So those are called draws. And you're always putting the value into the project and then getting those draws to get to the next stage. Once the construction is done, then they roll the mortgage into a closed term with the lender. This is an important point. Most lenders do not want to be around just for the construction. Private lenders, they're fine with it, but most major banks only do construction so that they can get the finished product. They don't really like to be in it for the construction because they're heavily exposed during that time. Like if you got half built on your home and then you couldn't complete it and the bank had to foreclose, how many people want to buy a half finished home? Not a lot of people out there, right? You know, unless you got a really good deal on it. Well, guess what? The banks don't want you getting a really good deal on it. They want to get their money back. So that's the situation, and that's what they're faced with. And not to mention, there can be challenges buying a half-built home. You don't know what the quality was. If these people were running out of cash and into the project, maybe they're cutting corners. And I don't have time because I have some really cool, well, not cool, really bad examples of situations where people are cutting corners in construction. But the reality is that sometimes starts to happen, and that's the concern with selling a half-built house. In general, most of the time the lenders will go up to 75% or 80% loan to cost. So you notice I'm using LTC, not LTV. So in our world, if you've done financing a number of times, you'll hear brokers or bankers talk about LTV, which stands for loan to value. And construction is loan to cost. There's a difference between the cost and the value. In general, you expect that the cost might be $1 million, but you're hoping the value might be 1.1 or 1.2. The lenders will lend on the cost, so the land cost plus the construction cost. So here's how a construction mortgage typically works. They typically give you a land draw, and that's about 50 to 65% of the value of the land. And then they give you money at the lockup stage, which is about 35 to 40% complete. So that's typically when there's doors, windows, and everything's put up. No wind would pass through the house is a good way of describing this. Once the electrical and plumbing has been roughed in, that's about 65% complete. That's typically the next draw. Finishings, that's usually about 85% complete, and then complete, which is when the landscaping is done and you know, everything else has been wrapped up. Railings are in, that kind of stuff. And so this is typically the draws that you get. There's usually 4 to 5 draws that you would receive during your typical construction financing. And this is the spreadsheet that I was alluding to. And this spreadsheet, by the way, I'm happy to email anybody who would like a copy of it. But this gives you an idea of how construction financing would go. And I'm actually going to go through this a little bit with everybody and just give you an illustration here. So the example I'm using is a build cost of $400,000, a building land cost of $400,000, and a building cost of $400,000. The lender's going to lend 75% of the value of the property, which means that your approved mortgage is $600,000. And so there's no current debt because you're buying this property. There's something called a lien holdback, which is going to be something that the lender is going to hold back. So what a lien holdback is if you build the home for, I believe it's 60 days after closing, contractors can place a lien against the property if they were not paid. The bank wants to hold back money to make sure that if a contractor does put a lien against the home, that there's money set aside to ensure that they can cover off any liens that were placed against the home. And unfortunately, that does come up every once in a while. And so they want to make sure that some money's been set aside. So they actually take money off on each draw for the lien holdback.
Is that standard across all financiers?
For the most part, most of them like to set money aside for the lien holdback. Yeah.
Cool.
Sometimes on construction deals, they're less likely depending on the builder and their expertise. But in general, residential, they usually have a standard 10% lien holdback. We've selected yes here. We have a vacant land advance, and so we're getting some money at the land stage. And the land is not already owned because we're buying the land. And so that's the way we've set up this presentation here. So at the start, the 0% complete, there's no advances to date. We still have 100% of the construction remaining. So the cost to complete the construction is still $400,000. So if you're approved for $600,000 and the cost to complete the mortgage is or complete the construction is $400,000, then that means that $200,000 is available to advance. That's the way that the math works. So they're always looking at, you know, how much money you've been approved for and how much money is remaining to finish the construction. And that's the way that the calculation is always determined on each draw. And so now at this stage, you'll get $200,000. What I've added in, because these are not typically on the lender's worksheets, I like to add in a couple of extra columns here. So I added in a cost to get to the next draw. So we know that if the lender wants to do the next draw at 40% complete, which is the lockup stage, 40% complete of the $400,000 build cost is $160,000. So far, you bought the land for 200 or 400,000, and the bank gave you $200,000 financing. So you put 200 grand into the deal, and to get to the next stage, to get to the lockup, you're going to need to put another $160,000 in. So your total cash you put into the project so far is $360,000, right? So that's the amount of cash that you put into close, and then to get up to the lockup stage. And I will say that in general, this is usually or very close to the peak capital required. So if you ever want to figure out how much cash do I need for construction, it is generally about 50% of the overall project value. It's usually 50% of the land cost plus 50% of the build cost. In this case, we can see it's $360,000, which is pretty close. So it's usually around that number, give or take. And the challenge, of course, is, again, they gave you 50% of the land value, and then you need to finish 40% of the construction, right? So this is where the peak capital requirement kind of kicks in, and it becomes more challenging for people to qualify in many cases because of that capital requirement. So the next stage, we're 40% complete now. You've gotten that done. You've advanced $200,000 so far. The cost to complete the construction is $240,000. And so now the available amount that you can receive is $144,000. So they're actually taking off 16 grand off of the number and saying, okay, we're going to for the lien holdback. So really 160 grand is available to advance, but they have to take off the extra 16 grand, 10% for the lien holdback. And then you need to get up to the next stage, which requires you to get put in another 100 grand into the deal. And so slowly over time, you'll see that your peak capital position is slowly decreasing. You have less capital exposed during this process. But in general, what always ends up happening is they're always looking at how much capital is required to complete the construction on it, and making sure that the amount that they're advancing in total ensures that they've set aside enough money. And so the way to look at this this situation is you're always looking at your approved mortgage minus the amount that they've already advanced minus the amount to complete the construction is going to equal zero. So those numbers are all going to be totaling zero if you subtract them all together. So this spreadsheet makes things easier too, because you can just punch in the numbers and it'll give you a quick idea of how much capital you would need to finish the project. And so this is where we usually just send it out to clients and they can punch in the numbers themselves. And it makes the math a little bit easier to understand. I'm usually at this stage, there's usually a lot of questions about construction. So I'm just going to quickly check my chat box here just to see if there's anything that I need to address.
I think one of the primary questions is just if this spreadsheet is available to share.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yep.
Yeah, we'll get that out to attendees and make sure that you have a direct line to Kyle as well. I have a bit of a unique question, maybe. People who are doing, whether it be build for investment, buy and hold aspect, income property, versus build to hold. Build to flip, like build to sell, make a profit, versus build to hold as your primary residence. In typical cases, is the landowner and I'll call them developer, are they getting their money back out of it, kind of thing, in a sense, like compared to just buying an existing home? Like, are they getting more than 20% down in a sense, so that it feels almost like a discount to build your own piece, or are you spending more because it's your dream piece?
Yeah, good question. See, because they're only financing loan to cost, you're not pulling out any of the extra equity that's kind of built into the project. So you can, if you want to, you can apply to refinance the property a year after you're done the construction and pull out the extra cash. So in this case, let's say that you build this home that I've got up on the screen, and it's worth the cost is 800 grand, and you get a mortgage of 600,000. But let's say that a year from you finishing the construction is worth $1 million and you have it appraised. Then you could potentially go to the lender and say, hey, I'd like to refinance this property and get a $800,000 mortgage approved, 80% of the value. Well, now 80% is 800 grand. Well, guess what? That was exactly what you paid to build this. And so now all of your cash that you put into this project is back in your pocket. So it is possible to do that. What you'll find is that if you do it on the residential side, then there's it's a bit more flexible, and the way that they underwrite it is based more on your personal income and whatnot. I actually have a slide, so I don't want to jump ahead too much. I have a slide that actually breaks down the difference in underwriting policies between residential, commercial, and private, and that would be a good time to kind of go into your question a little bit, Steve, on how they treat the underwriting and how they determine the maximum loan amount.
Okay. One other thing that's top of mind. Is construction financing very similar in the sense of just a standard mortgage where you have a variable rate and a fixed rate, or is it nope, you just have fixed?
So during construction, it's usually a mortgage that's prime +1 or prime +2, depending on which option you're going with, the bank, et cetera. They're usually interest-only payments during the construction, and then they roll into a mortgage term once your construction is complete. A few lenders, I think 2 or 3 of them, give you a regular mortgage rate right off the bat, and it's interest only. And when you finish the construction, you just continue into that term. But most lenders, it's a construction rate while you're in construction, which is a higher rate. And then once you're done the construction, then you roll into a regular mortgage. Yeah. Cool. So again, I know that this spreadsheet can be a little bit complicated. It's much easier once you kind of dive into it, and especially if you're an Excel nerd, you can click on the cells and you actually see how everything's calculated. But at the end of the day, they're always going to advance you a mortgage where they are still holding back from your approved amount. They're holding back enough money to finish the construction. Okay, that's the easiest way to look at it. So in this case, again, on the first draw that you get at 40% complete, they've already given you 200 grand. They're going to give you another, it's effectively 160 grand because they're setting aside 16 of it. So the 160 plus the 200, that's 360. Oops, I just clicked the thing to go ahead. That's 360 grand, and you still have 240 left to complete. Those two numbers add up to be 600,000. So that's how they're working it out. It's always the approved mortgage amount, and then subtract the cost to complete, which is 240,000, and it means that total at this stage, 360,000 is available for draws. If you've already received 200 of the 360, then that means 160 grand is available for you. But then they've got to set some money aside for the lien holdback. So Rob's question is, in your example, you need 300 grand in hand to do the build. You actually need about 360, Rob, to do it in this case, plus the property transfer tax. And another thing that lenders like to see is that you don't have just barely enough cash. Who here is actually, put it in the chat if you've actually built your own home or built a home before. I'm curious how many people have gone through this process. Not very many. I don't see anybody so far that has said, okay, we've got Jay. So one person so far. I'm going to tell you right now, especially if you're building your own home, people almost always go over budget, almost always. And so you're like, just go a little bit higher here, just a little bit higher here. Many lots, yeah, yeah. I mean, the 110% of the time. So that's a problem too, and the banks are very aware of that. So they want to know that that you have enough money set aside to do this. And so really, even if the peak capital as per the construction budget is saying you need 360, they still want to make sure that you have extra funds available. And usually the estimate number here is another 10% for what they call cost overruns. So they usually like to see that you have some extra cash available. Rob is asking, so if your money is held as equity in an existing home, can that count? The average Joe isn't going to have that kind of cash. So that is common for people to just borrow against other assets they have to then do this. So the only question, Rob, is usually for construction financing, you usually have to income qualify for the debt. Not always, but often you have to income qualify for construction financing. And sometimes that can be a challenge too, if you're borrowing a lot of money, especially if you're trying to build your home while you still own your own home and you're going to live in that while you build the new one. You're effectively bridging. And in many cases, that means, well, you know what, if you want to have your cake and eat it too, then you probably have to pay private lending financing to do your construction until your existing home or your new home is built. And then you sell your existing one, and then you can refinance that debt and get a bank loan on it after that. So cool. I'll move on from there. Okay, so next thing here, I want to go through some of the pros and cons of building your own home and what the difference is here. Because at the end of the day, if you need that much cash, then well, what are the benefits to doing it? One of the pros, of course, is you're building it your way. You get to choose, where is this going to go? What colors is it going to be? What's the layout going to look like, etc. The other nice thing is you're saving on some contractor markup costs, which is generally about 10 to 20% of the cost. So if I look at this from a different perspective, if you're a builder or developer going to go and build and spec a home, so you're basically building it to sell, in general, and then not too long ago, the margins were closer to about 20%, maybe 15 to 20% over and above your cost was your margin. Nowadays, I'm seeing some developers still doing deals in the high single digits for margins. But in general, there's a profit built in for a developer to build something and then sell it to somebody else. If you're building your own home and then hiring a contractor to build that, you're going to save some of that contractor markup because you're taking on the cost of the financing and you're buying the land and doing all of those things. The other thing is just controlling it. So you own the land and build it when you want at your pace, instead of buying a pre-sale and buying it when the builder's going to have it done for you. So you might find a perfect piece of land and you say, hey, you know what? I'm going to buy the land. I'm going to build on it whenever I'm ready. Whereas if you buy something, a piece of land, or you want to build on it at some point in time, a developer is probably not going to buy a piece of land for you and be like, hey, no worries, man. Whenever you want to build, I'll build on it. That's their money stuck in that property until you're ready to build on it. So it's harder for you to have that kind of control in that situation where you're asking somebody else, third party, to build it for you. There's a couple of cons though too. So let's go through the cons of going through construction. You need a lot more cash. You need about 40 to 50% of the project cost in total in general. It's harder to get financing for construction. So some of our clients that are self-employed or have some kind of special program that they're looking for, this can be a challenge. Some examples of challenges too are some banks won't use income from basement suites, or they'll have to factor in some kind of rent payment, or if you're still owning your own residence, they'll have to factor in that payment while you're doing the construction, because you're going to live somewhere while you're building the new home. So it can get harder to actually qualify for construction financing, and the banks are making it pretty tough for you to qualify for it. Another hassle is that every time you want to draw, you have to send an appraiser out. So they don't make it easy on you. It's not you snap your fingers and say, okay, I'm ready for money. You have to tell the bank, then they take a day or two, order an appraisal. Appraiser takes a couple of days to get there. They do the report, send it back to the bank. They take a couple of days, send the notary or lawyer a note. They take a day or two to release the money to you. Like, there's a bit of a hassle here. And a lot of clients, if they can, one of the ways of doing this is just setting up a home equity line of credit against another property that you own. If you have enough capital available in that, then it's much easier to use your own line of credit you have to fund a project like this. So there are a couple of different ways to fund the construction project. There's residential, commercial, and private. So on the residential side, this is where you're dealing with banks, credit unions, non-bank lenders. And in general, it's usually prime plus one during the construction. Sometimes some banks are closer to prime plus two, but in general, usually close to prime plus one. This is where you're going to have the tightest underwriting policies, and it's client focused, debt servicing focused. So the moderately property focused, and they usually prefer owner occupied. Sometimes they will do a rental property on the residential side, but in many cases, they don't like to do rental properties under rental property construction. Some lenders will do it, some lenders won't, but some lenders are fairly picky about that. In general, with residential, it's more client focused and less property focused, which can be good or can be bad. Like if you're building a property in a more remote area, you might find that it's easier to get residential financing if you're a strong client, because they're going to look more at you as opposed to where the property is to determine whether you're going to get money or not. On the commercial side, we're still dealing with banks, credit unions, and non-banks. The rates are usually prime +1 to prime +2 now. Fees are anywhere from 1 up to as high as 2% sometimes. There's a bit more flexibility with the client as far as their individual credit and income is concerned, but they're more property and project focused. They're looking more at the profit margin on the project. Sometimes they need pre-sales. In fact, in many cases, they will want pre-sales on the unit. Some lenders will say, okay, well, we don't need, if you only have 2 units that have not been pre-sold at any point in time, then that's fine. So you can phase out your project, means you're only building 2 properties at a time. As long as you're not building more than 2, then you don't need to have any pre-sales. Some banks will say we need at least 50% of your units pre-sold before we'll give you your first draw. So there's some more requirements on that. The other avenue here is that you can focus it more on the budget and the like project-based way of looking at it, which is what's the profitability of the project, and looking at here's my profit margin, here's our experience doing these deals, and we've got this many deals pre-sold, et cetera, et cetera. Another way that we've also positioned these, especially for newer builders, is we say, hey, look, we're going to look at building these to sell. However, if the client keeps them and operates them as a rental property, then the income generated would cover a mortgage of this much. So in commercial lending, they look more at the property itself, and they look at how much income would the property generate if it was a rental property. And maybe the property as an income property would cover a loan of 65% of the value. Then the bank might say, okay, we'll give you a loan of 65% financing to go out and do the construction, because once you're done, the property will cover itself up to 65% financing. And so that way you don't have to have any pre-sales or anything like that. The bank feels more comfortable that once you're done up to this amount of funding, the property will have itself covered, and the mortgage will be covered by the rents. Different markets are better for this. We've done a couple of projects in Souk, and Souk, the rental numbers are pretty good, and so it's a bit easier to pull that off in Souk. There's certain markets where it's a bit harder to do this in. So, like Vancouver, for instance, the $2 million home, you're not going to get more than like 30% financing on that, maybe 25%. It's really difficult to get commercial financing for those types of deals in a major urban center. Next is private. So this is mixed, which are mortgage investment corporations, private lenders, et cetera. These are the highest rates out of the bunch, 6 to 12%. Usually construction is about 7.5 to 8.5%. Fees are anywhere from 2% to up to 5%. Most of the time it's 2.5 or 3. There's minimal client underwriting. So they're really focused on the property, where it is, what it is, how much money they're lending on, and what's the exit strategy. And so they are the most flexible. And in many cases, they'll be more flexible with how you set up your draw schedule. So you might not have to adhere to the bank's draw schedule. You might be able to say, hey, I need some money. You send the appraiser out. Hey, you're 22% complete. Okay, here's the amount that you can receive on the draw, and then they keep progressing things forward that way. So more flexible, but you pay for that flexibility.
Does that also mean then that they're doing less due diligence, from what I hear, because they're not doing due diligence on the client themselves, but they're going to be able to provide financing faster? Yeah, they're definitely faster. If you're in a bind, then that's one of the better places to go.
There are some decent sized builders who use private lending almost all the time, even if they could get bank financing, because they're just so sick and tired of jumping through hoops to get bank financing. No matter how seasoned they become, it's always a 2 to 3 month process to get the financing through their bank, where if they just got a private lender to do it, yeah, you pay a bit more for the financing, but it just gets done and you can just move on to the project and get it done faster, which sometimes increases your margins. So, yeah. So I also want to talk a little bit about creative ways of doing it, because I've talked a lot about pros and cons here, and we want to start thinking outside the box a little bit on what else you can do if you want to have a custom-built home, but you don't have the amount of cash needed. Here's a strategy we proposed to a couple of people: is hire a builder to build it for you. You found the piece of property, you know what you want to be built. You hire a builder to do it. The builder buys the land, and then they enter a pre-sale contract with you. And so you're saying, hey, builder, here's a contract. I'm putting up a sizable deposit to buy the finished product from the builder once it's done. and you're going to be the one qualifying for the traditional mortgage once the project is done. And this allows the buyer and the builder, or sorry, the borrower, they all have B's, eh? Anyways, it allows the borrower to only have to get the mortgage on the finished product, which would allow them to get an insured mortgage if they wanted to, or would allow them to get a standard mortgage, especially if there's qualification challenges. In this case, of course, the builder is probably going to charge them something to do this, and the builder would want enough of a deposit because they're going to build a custom-built house just for you. They want to know that if you don't end up actually fulfilling your obligations of the contract and buying it, they want enough of a deposit that they can turn around and sell it very quickly and at least get their money back. So this is one strategy that we've helped a couple of clients do, was that when they wanted to build it themselves, they didn't have a cash, it's okay, just hire a third-party builder to build it for you. This is another option that we find very frequent. Just using cash or HELOC to build it. You can leverage other real estate that you own, and then you don't need a construction loan approval. And in fact, we do this quite often for clients. We're like, it's such a hassle to go through the construction financing. It's like, then get a big line of credit on your residence, and then just use that to fund the project. And then you don't have to deal with draws because you just cut checks as you please. You don't need to get the financing approval from the bank, but you do have to, usually this is for people that have a residence that's worth quite a bit of money, and they can freely get a big line of credit on that to then use to fund their construction. And then what you can do is, once the property is complete, then you can refinance it and use those proceeds to pay off the line of credit and get a mortgage on the new purchase. A couple of other tips and tricks I want to go over. Capital gains. So here's an interesting thing. This comes up quite a bit, and one of the reasons that people like to build their own home. If you build the home for $800,000, but it's worth closer to $1 million, well, guess what? If this is your primary residence, and then you sell it in a couple of years, there's no cash or no tax on that extra gain that you made. And so you'll find a lot of builders, they're like, why are they? I can't believe they put their spouse through this. They move every couple of years. That's crazy. Well, there's a big tax incentive for them to do that, because they keep building their own home, and then they sell their own home and then build another home for themselves, and there's no capital gains on that. So that's something that is very important to look at. You have a caked-in gain, and you're not paying tax on it because it's your primary residence. Another thing, again, just saving on the costs, because the builder margin, something to think about is that you're gonna be able to build it for a little less than what it's actually worth once the complete project is done. Here's an interesting thing I want to mention, because sometimes I have clients say, well, why don't I just get a traditional mortgage on the house and then tear it down and build it myself? I know it happens, frankly, the financing world is very different than it used to be in our parents' day and age. When back in the 70s and 80s, you go get a mortgage through your local bank, and your branch manager would be driving by. It's like, hey, isn't that Bob's house? It's been torn down. I told him not to tear that home down. Like, that's not the way the world works anymore. The underwriting is all centralized in Toronto or Calgary, wherever it is. The bank will probably never know that you tore down their home, but I need to tell you that in your standard terms and conditions of your mortgage, it will tell you you're not allowed to tear down your home, because guess what? A piece of dirt is a lot harder for a bank to foreclose and resell than something with a home on it, right? So you have to keep that in mind, that you're not supposed to be able to do this. I know people do it anyways, because sometimes they say, oh, I just have enough cash to do the build myself. I'll just tear down the home and redo that. And I'm pretty sure that a lot of our clients get away with it. And then they go back to the bank and say, hey, I just want to refinance my house. Like, whoa, this is not the same house that was there 2 years ago. So it's like, yeah. And the bank's like, but it's worth a lot more. And yeah, we'll give you an approval. So, you shouldn't have done that. You should have told us. But yeah, so you have to understand it is a different bucket. If you're with a bank right now and you want to tear down your house and you tell the bank that, they're going to say, okay, you need to break your mortgage, pay a penalty on your current mortgage, and go into a construction mortgage. And then once you're done the construction mortgage, then we'll put you back into a residential mortgage. But if you're in a 5-year fixed rate mortgage and you have $1 million mortgage, for instance, you might pay a 50 grand penalty to break your mortgage to go into a construction mortgage with the same bank, and then finish construction, then move back into a residential mortgage into new higher rates once you're finished. So just something to keep in mind is that it is a different bucket and pool of funds. It is higher risk to do construction than it is to just lend on something that already exists. something I do want to touch on. I don't want to go into too much detail, but for those of you that are looking at much larger scale projects, there are programs where you can get up to 100% loan to cost financing for CMHC insured construction. So when you're building residential real estate, if it's 5+ units, you can get CMHC to insure a commercial mortgage for you. And in fact, on a regular commercial mortgage, you can get up to 85% financing. So actually more leverage than you can get on residential, and longer amortizations. And if you're doing construction and you meet certain criteria, you can actually get up to 100% loan to cost financing through CMHC in the bank at lower rates than residential financing. There's a bunch of criteria that need to be met. You need to make sure that a certain percentage of your units are underneath certain targets for median income ranges in the area. Also, your rents have to be 10% below the market rents, and a couple of other criteria. But if you can fit the criteria easily, certain areas and certain markets of Canada are very good for this, and you can get really high leverage financing. You still have to adhere to the draw schedule, but you can end up building the entire construction and have all of your cash back out on the construction if you meet CMHC criteria. I will say this, it is up to 100% loan to cost. Most people don't get 100% loan to cost, but it is possible. So throwing it out there, and if that's something that you wanted to learn more about, then I'm happy to talk more about that. Another key, lenders don't like financing bare land. So if you want to buy bare land and you don't have intentions or plans to build on it immediately, like within the next 6 to 12 months, then most banks will not finance just the bare land acquisition. You often have to go to private lenders for that. Occasionally, we've got 1 or 2 credit unions that will consider lending on bare land before you have the plans and drawings to build on it. Most lenders will require you to have plans and drawings and a budget that you intend on building on that land, and have the building complete within about 12 months. And last but not least, on the residential side, lenders usually require you to be income qualified in order for you to qualify. So just something to keep in mind. There's not as many special programs, like not as many net worth programs, special like stated income or corporate net income programs, et cetera. So it is harder for you to qualify for construction mortgages. So that's something that you just need to keep in mind. So let's help you build your dream home. We've got a bunch of more information on our website. We do monthly webinars. So if you ever want to learn more about that, we have a commercial lending one that comes up November 3rd, if anybody wants to learn more about that. And if you ever want to reach out to our team, we're happy to book a consult with you. Also, for those of you that haven't read my book, I call it my expensive business card, but I wrote this book, I think 2 years ago now. Anybody that's interested in reading more about investing in real estate, it's great book, especially for the fundamentals. And I'm sure even you seasoned investors will grab a couple of little tidbits out of the book. So anybody who'd like a copy, you can email us at info@greenmortgageteam.ca. I'll finish my canned presentation now, and then I'll start to answer some questions.
That's awesome, man. Everybody, for those of you who are still on video, please, we can't do like a round of applause. So we do happy hands here. So everybody just give Kyle Green some happy hands here. Show me you appreciate the presentation, the time, and the energy that it took to prepare that and to present that. I think there's a lot of stuff in there, dude, that we all talk away. One of the final points that you made there was that a lot of lenders don't like lending on bare land. Some investors of mine recently-ish bought a piece of bare land, and they weren't expecting to have to put 100% down payment on it. And they're like, oh yeah, sweet, we'll remove subjects, no big deal. We'll at least get 50% LTV on it or something like that. And then whoever it was that they were working with went back and like, nope. Like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Which radically changed the numbers, obviously. So obviously it's great to have somebody like Kyle in your back pocket to make sure that you're doing everything and you're well prepared. I did see a couple pieces in the chat there. I see the chat blowing up too with a ton of appreciation. Just gonna circle back to some of these questions here, just to answer them real quick. Just spending like 5 more minutes to answer some questions here, and then we'll wrap up. Yep. Would financing be the same for adding a garden suite, or would that be done with the second mortgage?
Yeah, so Megan, in general, if you can avoid having to do a construction mortgage, is better. You can do a refinance. If you have enough equity in your home, it's better for you just to get a refinance approved for 50 grand or 100 grand and just take that money out or add a line of credit to your current mortgage and then just use that to fund it. It's much easier. But if you have to, you can restructure things and go into a construction mortgage on a refinance if you need multiple draws. So if you're doing a much larger scale construction budget, like 200 grand or 300 grand, and you need the future value of the asset in order to be able to borrow that money, then you might have to enter into construction. But adding a garden suite, probably not something that you would need to borrow that much money unless you're literally lifting the home to add another level to it or something like that. So in general, lenders on a refinance, they usually like to know that your renovations are more cosmetic than anything. Sometimes if it's more structural, then they'll say, well, this really should be more of a commercial mortgage or a construction mortgage. So you need to go into a construction mortgage to do that.
Awesome.
Michael and Holly had a question. So is it easier to get construction financing for multifamily? So it's not easier. It's just that the rates can be better if you fit certain criteria. And again, I'll say this: CMHC will say you can get up to these levels of financing, but it's not common for people to be able to get that type of financing. You know, in general, you're still getting 65, 70, 75% financing for multifamily construction, but it is possible in certain situations and climates for you to be able to do that. But the income still has to cover all of that expense. And if you're borrowing 100% of the value of the asset, it gets pretty tough for the rent to cover off all of the mortgage payments, all the expenses, and put more cash in your jeans, because usually they want the income to be 1.25 times the expenses approximately. Kelly had a question. So I'm also interested in financing on a multifamily building, i.e. small to mid-sized apartment. So that might be something, Kelly, to check out the next webinar I do, because I'll be talking about commercial financing. And commercial financing is different, but in general, they're looking for the income of the asset to be about 1.25 times all the expenses. I have a spreadsheet for that too. So of course I have a spreadsheet for that. If you email and ask for the spreadsheet, I can send that out to you too, but it allows you to pre-underwrite how much financing you can get on a potential commercial real estate acquisition. And when we say commercial, anything that's 5+ residential units is called a commercial mortgage. So Jordan has a question: would it be easier financing wise if you could find a house with a possibility to build a second house on the lot? Good question, actually, Jordan. So that brings up a good point. Banks often will not lend on secondary dwellings on a property. So a lot of the time they don't finance the value of outbuildings. And you would have to check with city bylaws and whatnot to see if that's even allowed or doable. But many lenders won't lend on the value of a second home. I'll give you a different example that kind of helps understand this a little bit. Let's say that there's a house that has a shop on it and the shop is worth about 40 grand. And let's say that Kyle Green's driving in the neighborhood, he's looking for a new home and he's like, oh, that house looks really nice. And then we start to get negotiation like, okay, so we think the house is worth 540,000. And I'm like, yeah, but I don't really want to, pay for the value of the shop because, I'm a guy that is really good with this, not so much with hammers and, all those tools and everything. So I don't see value in the shop. I would pay $500,000 for that house because I wouldn't pay for the shop. In fact, I want a nice pool so I can have a nice party in the summertime, and it's actually taking up some of the space for me to install a pool. So the problem is with a shop or any outbuilding is not everybody sees value in those outbuildings, and therefore, if the bank foreclosed on it and wanted to sell it and have it highly marketable to the maximum number of people, then a certain number of people won't see value in the shop and won't pay for it. There's certain number of people that are like, I don't want a second house on my property, So there's some issues with that. In general, though, Jordan, if you were buying a house and you were able to subdivide the lot and create 2 lots and then build a second house on that, then you would just get a separate mortgage on the other lot. And that's a bit of a different story. And that would be a great example of a great way of making money on an investment if you could find something like that where you could subdivide the lot and then build a house on the other side.
Is that then the same? Like lots of places here on the island have ALR zoning, and typically, from what I've seen from like basically Cowichan South, ALR allows you to have your primary and then a couple of outbuildings and then a shop and a place for your chickens and that kind of stuff. So even with the right type of zoning, it's still tough to get that financing for the second outbuilding.
Often, yeah. Because even in ALR housing, that it's sure there's people that buy ALR real estate to conduct farming activities on it, but there's also a lot of people that are buying ALR because they just want to live in the boonies, but they have no interest in using any of those barns or anything like that too, right? So, and again, some lenders will consider lending on the value of certain outbuildings, but many banks do not, and so it's just something that you have to keep in mind. And in general, if you can find that they're highly marketable in the area, sometimes a local credit union can be better for that kind of stuff. If there's, if they're buying a ALR in a town and there's a local credit union there that understands the real estate there, it's a bit easier. Major banks, a little more difficult. You got to remember, these are all guys making decisions from their 500 square foot condo in their ivory tower in Toronto, right? They're like, what is a barn for? Doesn't make any sense. Let's see here. What other questions do we have?
Lots of questions about the commercial financing webinar, the spreadsheet, that kind of stuff. Just to respect your time and everybody else's, I think now is a great time to wrap up real quick. We will definitely make sure that everybody who has registered and who has been here through this aspect on things, we'll make sure that you get not only the spreadsheet link that Kyle shared earlier for the commercial financing, construction financing, but then also the webinar for, was it November 3rd?
Yeah, this is the first Wednesday of every month. So our website has information about the login, but what I can do is, if you're going to send out an email, Steve, to everybody that attended today, then I can just give you the spreadsheets and also the link for that webinar for anybody that wants to learn more about commercial financing. So
sure, yeah, that'd be awesome and easy. Obviously, if you have any questions for Kyle, I've posted all of his contact stuff in the chat here. Dude, thank you so much. And thank you also to everybody who tuned in, paid attention, was interactive, engaged. We're showing up here every single month for you guys, really. That's why we're here. And we appreciate you, everybody for tuning in and having some fun with us. Just to wrap up real quick, we would absolutely love it. You're going to get an email immediately after this, wondering how you experienced this meetup. If you can give us an honest review, whether that be a 1 out of 5, a 0 out of 5, or a 5 out of 5, or if possible, a 10 out of 5, that would be awesome. We want constructive feedback. We want to share positive feedback. We want to be as impactful as possible to our community and be able to help those that are interested. Our next meetup, November 16th, third Tuesday of each month. So you've got a little bit of homework. You've got the first Wednesday of each month for Kyle's presentations. You've got the third Tuesday of each month for ours. I don't know if Darren's still on the call, but him and Alona do something, I think, on the first or second Tuesday of each month. Darren, if you're still here, throw that in the chat just to make sure that everybody's watching that as well. Awesome meetup too, because they had totally different format. And then jump into the Facebook community. Lots of communication happens there. And if you have any questions whatsoever, we'd be more than happy to either connect you with somebody like Kyle, other different professionals in the industry space as well, or be able to support you directly. Lots of ways to connect with us. But with that being said, that's October meetup. So I'll stop sharing. We'll open up just for a couple more minutes. I see lots of people saying thanks, Kyle, for being a part of this. Big thank you from Jay, from Randy, and myself. Always appreciate your time, your wisdom, your expertise. Every time I talk to this guy, I learn something. Excited to see you next week as well, and have some fun in Vancouver. But really appreciate walking through this, because I know a lot of people within our network specifically is looking for the development aspect of things. They've seen us and a lot of other people kind of step into that builder role. And I think there's a lot of people just very curious and want to dip their toes in. So I think this, along with your next webinar, is going to be super informative for a lot of people. So thank you, sir. And thank you to everybody else who's tuned in. One last time, just give everybody who's still here a little bit of happy hands. Thank you so much. And I'll just leave it open for a quick minute just to, have a little open convo. But thank you, Kyle. And thank you, everybody. That's a October 2021 wrap.